Pax Vobiscum. Happy Monday. I decided to call this the Mormon Monologue Monday. Just because I have my D&C here, section 1, I'm going over it. Y'all, I have no idea where this is gonna go because I'm just gonna read some stuff. There are so much things I noticed. I read this all weekend, just poring over it over and over again, because every time I read it, there was just something new or novel that I found or got out of it. And that's what these books, right? When you have religious context books, particularly, that's what they were designed for, right? The reader gets whatever you need out of it at that moment in time or whenever you read it. And so that's exactly what happened to me. So I'm just gonna go through and read some stuff that I picked up on. But before I do that, I wanted to say thank you to, I forgot his name. He sent me a couple emails, but he recommended turning my phone from vertical to horizontal just to increase the screen that you can see. And I was just like, wow, that was a duh. Why didn't anyone tell me that? And so thank you for that pointer. And also before I go into this, I was watching, oh my gosh, I was watching some video. There's someone that used to be a Mormon. I think her name, Grenfield or something. She's pretty popular, and she made a video about the Missouri stuff, about like the Garden of Eden and things like that, and how the church still maintains property there. And I actually ended up booking a trip to Missouri because of it, and I was like, this is all so intriguing. Why would I not want to go visit this? So now I'm going on a trip to Missouri, and I'm doing like a little tour. I went to actually the LDS website, and then they have like little sample itineraries of places you can visit if you want to go do it. And I'm just like, hello, I had such a great time in San Diego doing the temple and the Mormon Battalion Museum. So I'm like, why would I not go look at some other places that the LDS Church has, right? So I'm going to Missouri. That should be fun. So thank you. And that came from, I guess she'd be considered an apostate. That came from an apostate, and I was like, well, this looks fun. I'm gonna go try it out, right? So you never know where you're gonna get inspiration from. So I think she probably was like, no, that's not what I was trying to do. And I was like, well, thank you for the inspiration to book a trip to Missouri, because otherwise I don't think I would have really visited Missouri. I don't really know much what's going on there, but now I have a reason to go. Anyways, let's get into this. So section 1, such a great read. Basically, so this was written in 1831, and if you look, and I love this on this page because they have all the chronological dates of when all the things within the Doctrine and Covenants were released. And if you look at it, the first section that was actually included, 1831, is when section 1 was written, but the earliest revelations they have included in here are from 1823, and that was section 2. And so it just shows, right, just because I think people oftentimes assume things go in chronological order, and that's not necessarily the case, right? Because oftentimes when these revelations or these aha moments arrive, they happened at sporadic times, right? And so to make a coherent timeline, it's easier to organize things to make people in the future, right? The future church now to have more of a coherent narrative. So they had about 9 years of like stockpiling all these revelations and writing down and passing amongst each other. And as the church was formulating, they're like, hey guys, we need to organize these to make it something so it's easier for the masses to understand and get a hold of. And so that's when they kind of had this revelation come out, which kind of organized or made an introduction to the Doctrine and Covenants and all these things that they were doing as they were organizing the church. And so that's quite beautiful. I will say section 2 is kind of, I misspoke last time because I said 1 through 12 are all revelations, but actually section 2 is just an extract. And it's interesting though, because it comes to a point of curiosity, because it says in there that the priesthood is going to be revealed by the hand of Elijah the prophet. But then if you go to section 13, it shows that John the Baptist established the Aaronic priesthood. And then, who are those, the triple threat three, Peter, James, and John, those are the ones that next established the Melchizedek priesthood. So then it becomes, right, was it supposed to be literally or figuratively established through Elijah, the priesthood? And that can go into different symbolic meanings and play there, right? But regardless of who or like what actual names correlated to it, I think oftentimes what's lost in these books, and that's a great example, right? Because someone could easily say, hey, Elijah isn't literally listed in section 13 when the priesthood's restored. Elijah's name's not mentioned anywhere. But then in section 2, it says Elijah's going to reveal the priesthood, and it says, behold, I will reveal unto you the priesthood by the hand of Elijah the prophet. But then Elijah's not mentioned anywhere, right? So then it goes into the symbolic or literal layers of meaning, because it can easily be correlated. No, Elijah was a symbolic thing. It's tied to this or that, right? You can do it that way, and that's how different layers of meaning arise. And so when you read these texts, you can literally read the words and take them at face value, which I'm going to do a little bit of just to show the different layers of what you can perceive or what insight you can correlate to your own life. And I'm also going to do it from like a larger scale, like a systemic scale, global scale type thing, right? And that goes into like the figurative, the literal and figurative layers of reading text or reading words. And so going into this, just starting with verse 1, I love this. But again, this is an example of the different layers. So it says, verse 1, hearken, O ye people of my church, saith the voice of him who dwells on high, and whose eyes are upon all men. Yea, verily I say, hearken ye people from afar, and ye that are upon the islands of the sea, listen together. Right, at face value, what is that sentence saying? That sentence is saying, hey, y'all, like, gather around. Like, it's as if, like, you know, heavenly parents have a megaphone being like, attention, earthlings, which later on they do go on to say a lot in here, inhabitants of earth. And so it's just trying to do an all-inclusive inclusion of everyone on the planet, right? But in this verse particularly, you can see different layers emerging. You can interpret it multiple ways. For example, right, it starts out saying, hearken, O ye people of my church, saith the voice of him who dwells on high. Right, so clearly, you know, Heavenly Mother's not in the picture yet. So this is Heavenly Father's mic drop where he's introducing some of the introductions to it. But we'll see later on that there is some subtle hints that perhaps Heavenly Mother had some influence and she was handed the mic over. But then it goes on to say, right, we have the inclusive word people, right? We go from people to men. And it says, right, it goes, my church saith the voice of him who dwells on high and whose eyes are upon all men. That could easily be correlated if you're going to take it literally, being like, okay, Heavenly Father obviously cares about his bros, right? He wants to take care of his sons. He also cares about his daughters, but Heavenly Mother's got that taken care of. Heavenly Father, though, right, he wants his eyes on his men, his sons. And so that's why the pronouns switch from people, all-inclusive children, to just Heavenly Father focusing on mentoring and trying to disciple and teach his sons. But then it goes on to say, verily I say, hearken ye people from afar, right? And then it switches again to the all-inclusive pronoun of or the word people. And so you can take it like that, or you can say, hey, just from this time period when this was written, it's oftentimes the literature and whatnot is correlated to utilizing men or male pronouns, but it actually talks about all of mankind, right? That's why we call it mankind. It's just like a typical colloquialism that has developed in our culture, but we all understand that that's correlated to all of humankind, the whole species, the people, whatever. But then it becomes curious and, right, well, why is there a differentiation in a single sentence? Why switch from people, specifically to men, back to people? Because then, right, you can incite being like, oh, there's stuff in here specifically tailored towards the people that are assigned authority to administer these things to others and spread it around. Which later on, right, verse 33, I have to throw this out just in line with that train of thinking, right? If you're going to take these words literally, verse 33 goes on to, it's basically like Heavenly Father, how I interpreted it from one literal reading is, right, the verse says, and he that repents not, from him shall be taken even the light which he has received. For my spirit shall not always strive with man, saith the Lord of hosts. That could easily be equated to, right, Heavenly Father's like, sons down here, y'all with heavenly authority or divine authority, right? You boys down here, because only men have heavenly or divine authority within the LDS framework and majority of religious frameworks, right? I think actually like the Methodists or Episcopalians, I think they have like females. And actually the Anglicans, they just appointed their first Archbishop of Canterbury and it's a female. So congrats to them to being more inclusive and being more I guess, in alignment with like heavenly parents and not showing favoritism per se. But verse 33, right, if you're taking this literally, you can see this as a warning that Heavenly Father is talking about to the people that of the priesthood, being like, hey, this is like, with great power comes great responsibility. If y'all don't use it correctly, then it's going to be taken from you, kind of thing. Just because I gave it to you once doesn't mean that you're going to have it forever, type deal, right? That's what that verse could be contrived to, right? Or you can correlate it to the entire species, right? If you're not going to literally take it as, oh, Heavenly Father's just talking to the men that hold divine authority, you can take it to, oh, this is applied to the whole species. So what does it mean, right? And he that repents not, from him shall be taken even the light which he has received. Basically what that's basically, right, is saying, because repent is a very loaded word. Way back when it probably originally came into meaning, it meant like change your ways, right? Become aware, understand things. And like, how do you change your ways if not through understanding? So it's a lot easier to change when you understand what's occurring, and then you naturally embody those behaviors and patterns and demonstrate effort and whatnot. And so what this is basically saying, right, is hey, if you don't take care of the stuff you've been given, you're probably going to lose it, because just because you've been given it doesn't mean that it's guaranteed to stay yours forever, especially if you're not going to take care of it. And how many times have we seen that, right? Like, even if you have a car, if you have like a house and stuff, there's maintenance required with those things. They're great things to have, but you need to continuously put forth effort to maintain them to the level that they can perform at, or the level that they're capable of providing benefit to your life. But again, that requires effort. So that's just an easy example to show a different layer just from two verses from Doctrine and Covenants 1. I'm going to fast forward a little bit to verse 3, and I love this, right? Because the framing, if you look at the section 1, the framing of it is basically like an introduction to different types of scenarios. It's like a broad overview of what could occur. And if you look at it, we're going to zoom out real quick. Overarching theme is a lot of doom and gloom. It's a lot of like, if you don't do this, this is going to happen, right? And we do that oftentimes when we're raising kids and stuff, right? I don't know how many times my dad said to me, like, Sharon, if you do that one more time, I'm going to whoop your butt. And I was like, ha ha, and I like did it again. And I got a spanking, or I got grounded. And I understood why I got it, but I was testing thresholds even as a kid, right? Oh, that's great. Anyways, I remember one time actually, oh my gosh, I was at school and I was like playing, it was like dangerous to like fling rubber bands. It was like a thing back in the day where you'd have like little rubber band wars, where you have like little pieces of paper and you shoot them at each other. I got suspended for that for a day because that was deemed like, you know, like a dangerous act, right? I was being rebellious in verse 3, right? We'll get to that in a second. And as punishment, my dad made me do PT with him all day and like yard work and go to work with him. And I was like, I ain't doing that again. I'd rather go, you know, not play with rubber bands, because that outcome was not worth it. You know, I don't want to do PT with my father as a child because he whooped my butt. Anyways, but going to verse 3, it says, and the rebellious shall be pierced with much sorrow, for their iniquity shall be spoken upon the housetops, and their secret acts shall be revealed. All right, that sounds like disclosure, right? That sounds like the Epstein files, right? No one wants their name, no one wants like to be associated with being in the Epstein files, right? Or like the Diddy case. That's what that reminds me of. But if you look at it, right, you're just like, okay, those are extreme examples, right? Those are obviously things that people don't want to be associated with. But what about for like the everyday person, right? Like, what about me? Like, what do I take out of that? And what do like us as like the common masses take out of this? And so for me, I think about it being like, and the rebellious shall be pierced with much sorrow. For their iniquities shall be spoken upon the housetops, and their secrets shall be revealed. What does that verse actually, what's it implying? What's it doing? What function is it serving, right? I think oftentimes when we look at these things, we can talk about the meanings correlated to it, but oftentimes we don't talk about what function it serves. And so if you look at that verse, if you look at the language, if you look at things that are correlated in that, you're like, what function does this serve, right? What type of emotion would someone feel if you were in those shoes, if you were labeled as rebellious, if you were the one with your iniquities being spoken from the housetops and secret acts being revealed, right? And if you want to take a modern context, you can say like, how would you feel if you found out your husband or wife was mentioned in the Epstein files? Or like, I've been watching Love Island too, okay? So it's like, how would people feel like when people go on these shows, the masses, the public that watches, they just dig into every detail of these people's lives. And someone actually got kicked off the show because something surfaced where she said the N-word. And so she got kicked off. But then the masses again, right, started being like, well, this person over here, there's a screenshot and they said it too. Aren't they getting kicked off, kind of thing. And so people, right, what happens when that transparency occurs? What happens when all things associated with your life become public, right? Now, imagine if anyone were like, yeah, like all your text messages got published openly in church, right? Someone got up there during a testimony and just started reading off all your text messages to everyone that you've sent, right? That would necessarily cause like, you'd be like, ooh, I don't know about that situation, right? People would easily probably label you as rebellious. People would have different opinions of you, right? It's a hard thing to go through. So what does that do? It invokes like a state of like embarrassment, shame, being like, I don't want to feel that. I don't want to experience that. So how do I not get labeled as rebellious? What do I got to do to not have that word associated with me, right? And so then I would argue, okay, well, what's the definition of rebellious? Like, what does that correlate to? And oftentimes in here, they'll be like, well, it correlates to, actually, there's a little footnote. It says it just says rebellion. Anyways, what does that correlate to, right? Because you could argue a little kid stealing a cookie out of the cookie jar as being a little rebel. Or you can argue, right, me going on a pilgrimage or going on a trip, booking a trip to Missouri because someone that's no longer a member of the church tried to bash it, right? I'm being rebellious to a rebel, right? So it's just like, what perspective are we talking about here, right? I could argue, right, like 100-year-old going and driving a car and doing errands by themselves, that could be viewed as rebellious too, because I don't know how many people would necessarily feel comfortable realizing that there's like some centurions driving around out there with their cars and that maybe have like dementia or Alzheimer's, right? That's being a rebel. So it depends on what framework, again, how you're defining rebellious and really what that goes into, right? That verse is basically meant to invoke reflection, being like, hey, do I want to have the potential, like what type of behavior do I want to demonstrate or embody that potentially avoids a situation like that? And that operates on the assumption that embarrassment and shame carry meaning to the individual, right? And an easy example of that, right? A literal thing that you could say is rebellious is like if someone went outside naked and went to the store, right? That is complete, like out of the blue, like really rebellious, really embarrassing. But would that necessarily, be qualified as getting like cast out or shunned or set aside, right? So it depends again. And so I think that verse was not necessarily meant to be taken literally. I think it's meant to invoke a symbolic or a figurative type of behavior or outcome that wants to be avoided. And that's trying to, again, demonstrate principles to teach, being like, hey, if you don't want to experience certain things, just necessarily recognize that certain behaviors lead to certain outcomes. It doesn't mean that these outcomes are guaranteed, but it means there's a higher probability and possibility of it occurring. And I think everyone's experienced this at some way, shape, or form. And I can share a story with this where they've been shunned, they've been ridiculed, they've been embarrassed publicly, they've been humiliated, they've been labeled as something that's completely opposite of what they meant to do with their intentions. And it hurts, right? It makes you shy away from doing those things, right? You could have all the greatest intentions in the world and it completely backfires and you're just like, what on earth happened? Why was I labeled that way? Like, that's not what I meant. but you don't have the capacity to explain yourself in a way that's understandable. And so it leads to these feelings of, again, sorrow. It leads to feelings of like shame, resentment towards yourself, being like, I messed up, I made a mistake, I'm in the wrong. And it goes on this like negative spiral. An example of that, right? One time, me and my ex, we were like driving out of our neighborhood and we saw 2 dogs. Like they're like pit bull mixes or 2 puppies. And she's like a huge dog lover, one of my exes. And they didn't have any collars or anything on them. And so she's like, it's too hot in this Texas summer. I'm gonna put them in the backyard. Because we were going to like eat or something. I forgot where we're going. She's like, I'm gonna put him in the backyard, give him some food and water. And then when we get back, we can deal with it. Because I'm not okay with these poor little puppies running around the neighborhood without any collars or anything like that. And I was like, whatever, man, you can do you. She ended up taking care of them all day. She took them to like Petco to try to get scanned for microchips. No microchips came up. Me and her both joined a like Facebook lost and found group for San Antonio, posted their pictures, said where we found them, things like that, contacted the HOA, tried to find, like went door to door in the area where the puppies were found, trying to find the owners. No one had any information. And it was nearing the end of the day and she's like, hey, I'm not gonna take care of these. She wasn't gonna, she tried contacting some local, pounds or whatnot, but they were full, they wouldn't take them. And so she was like, okay, this is like, I'm not gonna just release them out into the wild, that's irresponsible. I want them to be rehomed or taken somewhere, right? And so she ended up posting on Facebook being like, hey, in the lost and found group being like, hey, no one's claiming these puppies. We already went to try to get a microchip. No one's having a microchip. Does anyone interested in homing these or adopting these or fostering them in some way, shape, or form? And she had multiple people reach out to her, and she actually like went through, talked to these people, like figured out, hey, are you someone that's gonna try to raise these dogs to be like violent? Are you gonna abuse these animals? Like did her due diligence to make sure they were being placed in a proper home. And she did this, I think it might have been more than a day, because she was just like, I remember, it might have been a weekend. She spent a significant amount of time and effort trying to locate these owners, and when that couldn't happen, she found someone online that was willing to take them in, like interview them, right? Because she's a police officer, so she did her due diligence investigation to determine if this person was okay to take these 2 puppies. And right before we were going to drop them off, we went to like Petco and rescanned them again, being like, hey, just to double check one last time, let's make sure they don't have any microchips. They didn't have any microchips. Went and gave them and like posted on the lost and found, being like, the dogs have been rehomed, like thank you everyone. Turns out there were actually someone's dogs or something like that, and someone on the Facebook group, the lost and found group, found out about that, and then they ended up kicking us out. And then the public went wild, being like, these people are stealing dogs, they were disrespectful, like they think that it's okay to give away someone's pets. And then they looked up who we were. They're like, this one's in the military, someone get a hold of her commander so we can report her. And then they found my ex, being like, she's in the police department. Someone contact the police officer or contact the police department. Let's report them because this is abuse. And we got kicked out of the group, and it was wild. We got screenshots of this from a mutual friend being like, hey, that post y'all made about those pit bulls and rehoming them, people went wild on it. And we didn't realize we got kicked out because we thought it was done. So that's an example, right, of how something that was like easily, like from our perspective, we're like, what on earth just happened? And it got taken to a whole nother context. And so that could easily lead to feelings of guilt, shame, anger, resentment, being like, I'm never doing that again. And she even said after that it happened, being like, I am never picking up a stray dog again. F that, not my responsibility, not my monkey, not my circus. I'm not doing that, because of the backlash she received for doing something that was actually quite beautiful and caring. So easy example there, right? So oftentimes, that goes on to verse 3. Let me see, there's so much in here. I'm already going long, so let me keep going. Verse 18, I loved verse 18 because it opens a whole can of worms. So let's go into that. Let's do some framing here, because verse 17 says, "Wherefore I, the Lord, knowing the calamity which should come upon the inhabitants of the earth, called upon my servant Joseph Smith Jr., and spake unto him from heaven, and gave him commandments." Cool, right? Then the next verse, "And also gave commandments to others, that they should proclaim these things unto the world." And it keeps going on. Who are the others, right? It doesn't clarify who the others are. It just says, "And I also gave these things to others." I gave him the Joseph Smith. Yes, acknowledges that, because this is the perspective, right? But then it says, "And also gave commandments to others," without clarifying who those others are. And that goes along the lines, right? Because in John 10:16, there's a verse that goes, "And other sheep I have, which are not of this fold," right? Jesus is credited with saying that. That's a quote from, a secondhand quote from Jesus saying that. And that goes along, right? Because in the Book of Mormon, that kind of is a reference being like, "An other sheep I have," right? The other sheep were like the North American peoples type thing, right? Same thing here. And verse 18, "And also gave commandments to others," right? Who are those others, right? And so it goes into it being like there's a whole other group of people that perhaps from an LDS perspective or a Mormon perspective, they weren't aware of, because it just wasn't part of the overarching plan or organization structure, plot line, things like that. And so just like in John 10:16, we have the same type of correlation, analogy, logic going on, where it hints at, hey, there's others involved in this that perhaps you guys aren't aware of, but they're doing the same thing. And there's more clarification, because you can go down to verse 24. It says, "These commandments are of me, and were given unto my servants in their weakness." Okay, it says, "After the manner of their language, that they might come to understanding." So then it provides evidence for verse 18 being like, hey, these others, potentially they received the same commandments in their language, in their culture, something from their perspective that they're going to be able to easily understand and grasp based on where they're at for their understanding, just like I gave this to you guys. You see the correlation there, right? And that's why you see, right, a lot of overlap in all these different faiths, even like Confucianism, like Buddhism, Hinduism. You see a lot of overarching recurring themes that are going along in all of them. There's an underlying narrative, and that could be correlated again, being like, hey, other people got this stuff too, that was tailored to their type of perspective and purview to help them understand it. Because again, if we were given this all in Chinese, right, it wouldn't do much good for us. Or like if this was given to North Korea, we probably wouldn't be able to have access to it, you know? Anyways, going along, I really like this because all through it here, it up until verse, I would say, 21 to 28, there is a very different tone shift in what is said. Oh, excuse me. Before that, we have a lot of words that invoke like if you don't do this, this is gonna happen to you kind of thing. Just making you aware, being like, hey, like these are the outcomes that are gonna happen to you. But when you get to 21 to 28, you start to see the introduction of, 20 even to 28, you start to see an introduction of possibility, right? It's no longer a definitive, this is going to happen. It turns into this may happen. And let's look at that. So 21, it says, or 20, it says, but that every man might speak. Verse 21, that faith also might increase. Verse 22, might be established. 23, might be proclaimed. 24, might come to understanding, right? That clause of might. What does the word might do? In those statements, it says, hey, if you guys demonstrate effort, right, these things potentially could happen. And these are like the good things that can happen. So it's just very curious that like the good things, the good possibilities that could happen were framed as possibilities, but the bad things were defined and presented as this will happen. But then it says, but these good things also might happen. And so why is it framed that way, right? What does that do? And that shows application to reality, because oftentimes the things that people remember are like the traumatic things, right? They remember the heartache. They remember the grief. They remember their first failure. They remember their first mistake. They remember things that they define as sins, right? Because those are things that easily resonate because they carry so much emotional weight and implication with those things. Whereas happy things, right? Like those types of joyous emotions or situations that are associated and correlated to those words, those are few and far between. Sometimes people say, right? People would say like, hey, like if you were to look at your day subjectively, oftentimes people will point out more bad things if they're already in like a grumpy mindset, right? It's Monday, right? So you can easily be like, oh, today this and this and this went wrong type thing, right? It's easy to get into that mindset and spiral. But then if you're in a mindset where you're already in a like opportunity or different framing of your experiences, you might notice the possibility and the potential versus like the definitive, this negative stuff is going to happen to me type thing. Which in a sense, right, framing things as negative, I actually appreciated that it kind of goes really into like doom and gloom. And some examples of that, guys, are like literally verse 7, it says, wherefore fear and tremble, O ye people. Then it goes on to say, shall be cut off from among the people, like if you don't obey. And it says, the anger of the Lord is kindled, his sword is bathed in heaven, shall fall upon the inhabitants of the earth, right? Those are a lot of scary things. They invoke a lot of like fear and anxiety type things. And when you see that, you're just like, well, I don't want to experience that. But at the same time, that prepares you being like, hey, it's like how you talk to your kids, right? Because, you want to protect your kids as much as you can from the realities of life. But at the same time, you also want to not make them be disattached or disillusioned from the reality of life, of like physicality, right? You can paint them the most beautiful picture and tell them to believe in themselves, but when they encounter and experience other people that have different perspectives, that express themselves differently, right? That things occur, right? What happens when those things happen? Well, you want to prepare your kid being like, hey, just recognize that these types of things occur, and oftentimes they're correlated to feelings of grief and sorrow, and they're scary. And so we use these words to describe them just to prepare you so there's not too much of a shock factor, so they're not in total disarray when they do encounter these things. Because if you have an expectation of like rose-colored glasses, when you eventually remove those glasses, you're in a state of shock almost, and you have to reacclimate and readapt and reorganize your thoughts and ideals and how you navigate existence, because it's such a unraveling thing to experience something that is completely opposite of what you expected it was going to be like. So I appreciate the doom and gloom language in there, because again, it creates a beautiful like emotional story arc and an immersion into reading the story and experience. And when you get to those verses though, where it introduces the possibility of these beautiful things happening, it creates a hope, right? It creates this like pause, this little bit of solace and comfort in the midst of like what could easily be contrived to like chaos and fury and uncertainty. And I would argue that's kind of like Heavenly Mother coming in, being like, hey, like, honey, this is like Heavenly Father being like, pounding down, telling a good story, like a good fish story, like blowing it up, being like, and then this happened, right? And then Heavenly Mother's like, sweetheart, make sure you mention the good things that could potentially occur. Make sure you throw in something nice, because we can't scare them all, okay? We don't want to scare our children into like following this. We want them to understand what they're actually doing. So we don't have to constantly hold their hand and we can kick them out of the nest so we can enjoy our lives again. You know what I mean? Anyways, going on to, so I like that part in there. Going on to verse 30, I have this highlighted. Verse 28, I want to go into it. It says, and inasmuch as they were humble, that they might be made strong and blessed from on high and receive knowledge from time to time. It's just funny because it's like, you might receive it from time to time, right? It's like you might get a little treat from time to time. I just like the inclusion from time to time. Let me see. What verse was I just looking at? Oh, verse 30 made me giggle a little bit just because at the last part of it, it says, the only true and living church upon the face of the whole earth. That clause, right? And I'll read the verse from the beginning. And also those to whom these commandments were given might have power to lay the foundation of this church and to bring it forth out of obscurity and out of darkness. The only true and living church upon the face of the whole earth. And it goes on to say stuff. With that, okay, that clause, the only true and living church upon the face of the whole earth. What does that do? That tries to show like, hey, that tries to establish this is it. This is where it's at. This is the finality. This is the closing chapter. We're getting it right. We got it right. Everyone else kind of like made different versions that are pretty good. They work, they function. Sure, they might have been around for a couple more 1,000 years than us, but we got it right. We are the ones that are true and living out of the entire planet. We're the only ones out of the whole earth. I understand what that's supposed to do, right? That's supposed to invoke like this state of finality, the state of certainty, the state of declaration of being like, hey, this is it. This is it, boys and girls, this is it. But I wanna bring this in here because that's not unique to LDS doctrine, right? This is a tactic, this is a thing that is utilized in multiple places because again, that's a very powerful statement. And this again ties back to, right, and also gave commandments to others, verse 18. So you would expect then, okay, these verses or these types of sayings being the only true church and the only truth upon the whole face of the earth. You would see that type of rhetoric and that type of repetition across all other perspectives if they're all correlated to a same underlying principle. Which, by coincidence, I have a little kid's book for the Holy Quran. And it literally starts out in the introduction. I'm going to read it. It says, "Dear children, the Quran is the best book to read in all the world." That's how it starts. Imagine that. Allah cares about us so much that he gave us a guidebook to help the best people, or to help us be the best people that we can be. All right? And so that's beautiful, right? Are we seeing a common trend here? We're seeing the same language. The best book to read in all the world. The only true and living church upon the whole face of the earth, or upon the face of the whole earth. We see the same type of analogy, the same type of perspective utilized because it's trying to be all inclusive, right? They're trying to, it's almost as if like it creates specificity for those people that believe it, but then within that framework, it also creates universality to make it have a greater depth of meaning. And so I love that, right? You'll see it across all sorts of different texts. I don't know if it's in the Siddur. I haven't quite looked at it through it that in depth. But again, just to show the repetition, right? And that shows the commonality. Yes, that could be correlated to proof that like the same commandments were given to other different various people across the planet. Let me see. But then also recognize, right? Depending on if that's literally taken literally and not figuratively or symbolically to represent a unity or coherence of understanding, then people oftentimes argue or they create this hierarchy being like, well, we're better. like, and it says it here, like, we're literally the only true and living church upon the face of the earth. But then you can easily take other books and literally say that, like, this is the best book in the world, right? So people, again, and this is in all the sacred texts and whatnot, there's repetition there. Let me see. I did say, like, so again, these texts are set up, and if you look at it, it goes back to kind of Jewish tradition, where they're set up to cause tension in the reader. They're set up to be thought-provoking. And so we're going to give an example of something that provokes thought to try to help create greater depth of meaning, right? Because things stay, like, if people aren't talking about this stuff to greater depth, and they're keeping it at, like, shallow emotional levels, saying, no, this is true, no, this is true, we're true because of this, and right? Every time they argue those things, like, how many times have people encountered online being like, this is true, and this is why? And then exactly on the other side, they'll be like, this is not true, and this is why. And they'll both take the exact same thing and just interpret it differently to show validation for whatever opinion or perspective they're trying to have validation for. Okay. With that, so we're going to introduce a little bit of tension here that's literally in the text. So with that, we're going to go to verse 35. For I am no respecter of persons, and will that all men shall know that the day speedily cometh. Okay, so for I am no respecter of persons. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that the heavenly parents don't not respect us, right? It just means that they have no favorites, right? Respecter means like favoritism, that type of thing. It says, for I am no favorite of persons, meaning like all of y'all, love all of y'all equally. But if that's the case, then why were some of the children, right? In verse 6, it says, or verse 4, it says, by the mouths of my disciples whom I have chosen in these last days. And then it says in verse 6 that the authority was given to my servants, right? And so it shows like, okay, well, if you're not a favorite of someone, then why are we specifying a different class of people as chosen? Why are we specifying certain children as chosen and authority, like given authority, when it's not correlated to like everyone, it's correlated to very specific people? And I would equate that to, right? What does that language do? Because if you look at the word my servants in verse 6, behold, this is mine authority and the authority of my servants, right? If you look at the word my servants, how often do people teach their kids, you want to be a servant? How often do we use that terminology in everyday life, especially when we're trying to teach people? Not often, I would argue, because the word servant carries a lot of connotation that isn't necessarily correlated to the implications of why it was selected in the first place. Like on the outside, right? I think if anyone was raising a kid and like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And if someone said a servant, you'd be like, wait, can you clarify that? Can you clarify what you mean by servant? You know, what do you mean by that? You'd naturally be like, huh, and pause for a second. But in this context, right, what is the word servant? Why was that selected, especially in like a religious book or context? Well, servant oftentimes implies humility, meekness, right? A desire to obey, a desire to follow within certain guidelines and thresholds, right? To go 65 miles an hour when the speed limit says 65, right? Those types of things. That's what a servant invokes. Someone that always obeys, that has that humble attitude, that's always willing, that has a smile on their face and just does what no one else wants to do type thing. But then also, a servant is basically like, you're just here to cater to other people. Like, screw your life. You're here to cater to everyone else. That's what servant implies. Like, don't have an opinion. Don't think about yourself. You're second. Everyone else is first. You're a servant. Make sure you're aware of that and know your place in the hierarchy of things. Like, you're here to wait on our hand and feet. You're not here to actually care about yourself. That's an afterthought. You need to put others first. Do we see how that gets into a slippery slope, right? So servant carries a lot of connotation. If you utilize the term servant outside of a religious context, people would easily take it out of perspective or assumption of meaning. And they'll be like, excuse me, right? That's why probably missionaries aren't instructed. Do you want to become a servant? People would be like, thanks, but no thanks. You know, it just doesn't come off well. But when you're within it, right? Again, it invokes that state of humility, things like that. But you could correlate that to be like, okay, the authority of my children. You could say that the authority of my offspring, right? If we're all children of God, then technically we all have some sort of capacity to have authority. It's not just reserved for a couple people. It can be given to anyone. And they kind of clarify that actually, because it says in verse, where is it? Verse 8, right? The introduction doesn't correlate to like, hey, who has this authority, right? Who's allowed to do this? And it says, verse 8, verily, verily, I say unto you, that they who go forth bearing these tidings unto the inhabitants of the earth, to them is power given to seal on both heaven, or both on earth and in heaven, the unbelieving and rebellious. Okay, what does that verse introduce? That's basically heavenly parents being like, hey, anyone can do this, right? Anyone that bears tidings unto the inhabitants of the earth, to them is power given. Right? It's not till later that we have definitive requirements, at least from within this framework, that allow someone to have more opportunities to exercise that power if they desire, exercise that authority, right? And I would equate that to like a gradient style learning. It doesn't necessarily mean that like you have the power to like tell people what to do. It's saying that you have like the power to utilize your testimony to demonstrate to others things that perhaps are desirable or they may want in their own life, right? Again, actions speak louder than words. Anyone can go around, and I should show a screenshot. Like I saved a couple of screenshots from threads and stuff. There's a couple people on there that like call themselves prophets, like label themselves as prophets, label themselves as like a warrior of Jesus Christ, things like that. Beautiful, right? That's a beautiful expression of how they utilize those words to inspire themselves, to show what they believe in, to show what carries meaning for them. But also they don't recognize that from an outside perspective, they may not be being interpreted through those things. And that's everyone experiences that too, right? Because I have a couple of people that email or comment and say things that based on their assumptions of perception. And, you know, I have no issues with it, right? I think someone in there is still kind of telling me that I need to like clean up my life and stuff. And some people are saying like, hey, I'm so proud of how much growth you've had. And I would kind of argue, yeah, like you need some sort of marker or example or demonstration of an outcome in order to measure some sort of change or result or perceive it. But just because, what's a way I'm trying to say this? Like for example, in my earlier videos, if I don't think anyone caught up on this, I purposely included like smoking my like vape pen thing, the weed. Or whatever's sold over the counter here in Texas. It's not even real weed. Doing that and then like having like a hard kombucha or something in my videos, right? That plays on assumption. If anyone's noticed, right? Those types of things. I have over 300 videos. In a very small section of those videos, I did that. And then going forward, we don't necessarily see it. And that's easy because you can play on assumptions, right? It's easy to measure change when you start seeing different things or different behaviors. And it's like, that's just called, you know, great, I don't know what it's called. Great storytelling, great maturity, great learning, great examples, right? And it's easy to assign meaning to those things. But once you get enough data points, right, people start correlating meaning to such things, which I love, right? That's how inspiration, that's how things spread, that's how understanding, blah, 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 goes about. But just recognizing though that like, hey, when something's observed, something's experienced, it's correlated through a specific lens, and oftentimes people don't re-examine their lenses and they just assign meaning assuming that it's valid, which it is valid, right? Because I can easily be labeled as rebellious, not spiritually ready, things like that, right? And that's fine. I have no issues with whatever people label me as, because it doesn't influence or impact what I'm going to continue to keep doing. You know what I mean? Like for example, like me booking the trip to Missouri or going to the San Diego temple, doing a pilgrimage to Utah. Where else have I gone? The Fresno temple, some meanderings in Corpus Christi. Yeah, all those things, right? I don't need to be a member to do that. I don't need other people's approval to do those things. I'm going to continue doing those things because I'm aware of the trajectory I'm going on, and I don't necessarily need people to understand it until it's time for them to understand it, right? It gets I think what's it called in here, where like things get revealed as time goes on and it becomes available. But anyways, point is, we're all in this together. It's a great time. I mumbled for quite a while. Oh yeah, I saved these from the LDS temple in San Diego, so that was really fun. Look at different languages. I love that. Beautiful. But all right, that was good enough. Hopefully that's some decent insight or thought-provoking concepts that can be discussed, because again, you can literally take a single verse and take it so many different ways. Apply it to yourself, apply it to others, apply it to the world, apply it to your family, apply it to nothing at all. It doesn't matter, right? Or it does matter. It depends on how you frame your perspective and what you desire to get out of the words and meaning. So, Pax Vobiscum.